Hey, Pastor Steve Waldron, I'm so thankful you're here with us today. Well, we've been studying about the ancient historical evidence for Jesus. It was a little book I wrote 16 years ago and trying to get it reprinted and updated some too. And so we're just going to summarize this. And so just know we're not going to be able to make a deep dive into everything. You know, if somebody comes in and says, well, Thales, well, check out the other videos we did specifically on that and not this one. This is just a general overview. I think you'll enjoy it, and a lot of evidence that we know Jesus existed. And I know, like Josh McDowell goes into, and evidence that demands a verdict, how just the manuscript evidence, the many thousands upon thousands of Greek manuscripts, but then there's manuscripts in Old Latin and Old Syriac and Syriac and Sahidic and so many other languages, about 500 languages, one of the first 5 centuries of the Christian era, all talking about Jesus. And there's nobody else in ancient history. There's no other event, no other literature. The closest would be like Homer's The Iliad, and it pales in comparison to all of the historical references to Jesus. Now, something else about the Gospels themselves. A lot of people just say, well, because it's in the Bible, we can't use that as evidence. But it is. It's historical evidence. Every time you see a custom in the 4 Gospels, that was a legitimate custom of the day. Whenever you hear of geographical markers such as mountains, rivers, plains, those are all where they're supposed to be, where the Gospels say they're supposed to be. City names, city places, customs, official names, names of Judaic religious groups. All of these are exactly what we find in the first century. So it is historical. The reason people would write it off as historical narrative is really twofold. First of all, it's in the Bible. The Bible claims to be a supernatural book. That's number one. Number two is Jesus did miracles, and they would just say miracles don't exist out of hand without examining the evidence. But if the Gospels are right in everything else, why wouldn't it be right in that as well? Also, prophecy shows us Jesus existed. It used to be we had no pre-Jesus manuscripts to look at from the Old Testament that prophesied about Jesus. And so it was just assumed, like Daniel, Isaiah, these things, they're either not talking about Jesus or they were written much later. But with the Dead Sea Scrolls from the 3rd century and the 2nd century BC, we have 2 nearly complete books of Isaiah that talk all about Jesus. Isaiah 7:14, Isaiah 9:6, Isaiah 53, and all the other scriptures that talk about Jesus, Isaiah 35. And so now we have things centuries before Jesus prophesying Jesus is going to come, even calling him Jesus in Isaiah chapter 12, salvation, Yeshua. And so that's very incredible evidence for Jesus. And then also the history of the Roman world around Jesus, and such as Nero's persecution. Why is he persecuting if there is no Christians or followers of Jesus? The 10 imperial persecutions, and Domitian and Trajan and the like. So, of course there was. And then there's all kinds of early instances of Christians. You can get these from Fox's Book of Martyrs. You can get these from what's known as the Ante-Nicene Fathers. A few of them is Clement from the 1st century AD, Ignatius, Justin, Melito, Athenagoras, Irenaeus, Polycarp, Aristides, Tatian, Papias, Quadratus, Montanus, Polycrates, Victor, Eleutherus, Zephyrinus, Alexander, Apollinaris, Aristo, Dionysius of Corinth, the Epistle of Barnabas, and some of these are pseudepigraphal. Hegesippus of Palestine, Manathetes, Rhodon, Theophilus of Antioch, 180 AD, the Shepherd of Hermas, the Didache, maybe 2nd century, at least some of it, the Acts of Paul and Thecla, and then even spurious groups and pseudepigraphal writings, such as, and some of the pseudepigraphal writings have already said, like Celsus, the Ebionites, Valentinus in 149 AD, the Gnostic Gospels and the finds of the Nag Hammadi library, Berilius, Cleomones, Sibelius, Epigonus, Praxius, Notus, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Nicodemus, and Zacchaeus in the Talmud. So obviously Jesus existed for all of these people to be worshiping him, writing about him, writing false things about him, writing in his name sometimes, and but writing true things about him, being able to trace the Roman bishops all the way back to the Apostle Peter, understands disputed, but immediately after that. And so, yeah, Jesus existed. So the Gospels are historical documents. And then we're going to go into some other things. Tacitus mentions Jesus in the Neronian persecution. Suetonius does as well. These are Roman historians. Pliny the Younger, Trajan the Emperor, an ancient Jewish crucifixion victim they found in 1968 from the first century. Early papyri that using confocal epifluorescent microscopic technology, P4, P64, P67, very well could have been from the first century, pre-66 AD. And then Cave 7, Dead Sea Scrolls, so many, have New Testament writings in them before 68 AD. Josephus writes about James, about John the Baptist, about Jesus. This is from the first century AD. Lucian of Samosata mocks Jesus in the second century, but how could he mock that which didn't exist? The Nazareth Decree in 1878, talking about a Roman imperial decree against grave robbing just in Nazareth. That really is because a Nazarene was raised from the dead. All right, and that's from the first century. Jewish burial ossuaries praying to Jesus from before 50 AD. Again, for further, more in-depth on any of these, check out our other videos, or hopefully get a copy of this book. The ossuary of James, the two Caiaphas ossuaries, you know, irrefutable about the stories and people, places of Jesus. The historian Thallus, correspondence with Hadrian and Cyrenius Granius from the first part of the second century AD. Copious evidence for Pilate, including the Pilate inscription, calling him exactly what the Bible called him as well. Justin Martyr's writings going to the Roman imperial records, saying, look, just check out the Roman imperial records. You'll find Jesus over and over and over again. Tertullian did the exact same thing. Went to their copious records and says, check them out. They talk about Jesus, which is what one would expect, because Pilate would have been giving records to Rome about this man Jesus and the commotions that he caused. Even Augustus Caesar mentions the slaughter of the innocents of Bethlehem during the birth of Jesus. Phlegon, 1st and 2nd century historian. Mara Serapion, somewhere just after 73 AD, mentions Jesus. Juvenal, he lived from the mid to late 1st century AD till the early 2nd century, mocks Jesus, mocks Christians. So maybe even during the time of apostles still alive. Seneca, the great Stoic philosopher, the trainer of Nero, talks about the Christians and what Nero, his master, had done. Ancient Jewish writings talk about Matthew, talk about Nicodemus, talk about Zacchaeus, talk about Jesus, talk about Mary, talk about Jesus supposedly did things, but they were considered magical acts, you know. And debates within the Jewish community, should miracles be done in the name of Jesus? Should even certain Christian writings be included in the Jewish canon? All these were going on in the 1st century AD. So Jesus existed. It's just impossible to say he didn't. Hegesippus, he was a Jewish person, lived near the time of the apostles, and he traveled from Corinth to Rome searching for the truth about Jesus. Celsus, a 2nd century writer against Christianity, writes about Jesus, mentions him going to Egypt, and on and so forth. Galen, the kind of the king of physicians through 1,000 years of history, Galen physician from 120 to 200 AD, talks about the steadfastness of Jesus' followers following his doctrine. Numenius, a Neo-Pythagorean philosopher from Syria in the latter half of the 2nd century, makes allusion to Jesus. Galerius, from 250 to 311 AD, he mentions the parables of Jesus. The finding of the house of the Apostle Peter in Capernaum with prayers to Jesus on the walls, dating from 80, 85 AD. I've been there, as a matter of fact. Heracles, proconsul of Bithynia and Alexandria during the later 3rd and early 4th century AD, talks about Jesus, trying to discredit him and bringing up that Pythagorean miracle worker Apollonius of Tyana. Then we have the Alexmenus Graffitito from, many would say, the 1st century AD. A picture of Alexmenos, a Roman soldier, worshiping somebody on the cross with a donkey's head. This was a common portrayal of Jesus early on by his detractors. And it says Alexmenos worships his God. 1st century, showing Jesus was crucified and he's being worshipped as God. The Jesus Cave, a church about 17 miles, I think it is, southwest of Jerusalem, that you go through a fig tree to go in, and there's a sign on the cave from the 2nd century AD, the hundreds AD, it says Jesus is present. Jesus is present. The underground churches in Turkey, including one of the newer ones they found, that could hold up to 65,000 people, and it was a city because the church literally had to go underground. That's from the 2nd century AD. Jesus existed. 1st century house churches in the city of Rome, catacombs in Rome, and even Northcote Sabellian catacombs in Rome. The Jesus is God Megiddo Church from 225 AD. In Megiddo, they found a church, and at the communion table, a soldier had dedicated it to Jesus, to the God Jesus Christ, to the God Jesus. And of course, the Dura Europa Church, 235 AD, where they even have some paintings of Jesus, among other biblical scenes. They found Jesus Synagogue in Capernaum as well. The Jesus boat, he probably never rode that boat, but it showed that boating, what it would be like in the 1st century AD. So many proofs of Jesus. It's overwhelming. Now, I've noticed sometimes in debates, I've watched a lot of debates on YouTube, that somebody brings enormous amounts of information to bear, and the rejoinder is, let me find one thing wrong or incorrect. Well, I just want to tell you, first of all, you could quibble on maybe a few of these, but the evidence is so overwhelming. It's impossible to logically make the claim Jesus never existed. It's easy to make the claim, but it's also easy to say the sky is made of brass and we're carried on the back of a turtle, a crystal turtle, through the universe. Anybody can say that. Proving it's another matter. And so Jesus lived. He died, and there's an empty tomb. He rose again. God bless you. We love you. Thanks for being with us. Join us daily. Check out our other videos. Subscribe. Hit the bell notification. We love you. Bye-bye.